Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm starting construction of a small greenhouse and I thought you might want to take a look at how I do this. We have a very windy location here, as you can probably tell from behind me. So we picked a greenhouse kit that is very resistant to the wind. We're going to be building the Sungrow 20 by Planta Greenhouses. It's 10 feet wide and 20 feet long, so kind of a medium-sized residential greenhouse. And we'll get more into the construction of that, but first we've got to build the pad, or the base. And there's a lot of different ways you can do a base for a greenhouse. You can have no base, just stake it into the ground. You can have gravel for the floor. You can use wood beams and secure the greenhouse to that. But we're going to use a concrete slab. Concrete is good because it's, of course, very durable. It'll be a good floor for the greenhouse for many decades. In this particular location, because of the wind, it's important for us to anchor the greenhouse to the ground. And then third, it prevents rodents and insects and other nasty things from coming up from below. So the first step in, of course, building a concrete pad is getting things level. I don't know if you can see behind me these orange stakes that I've got in the ground that shows where we're going to be building this greenhouse. Even though it may look level, it never seems to be level when you're working with concrete. I've got about a 12-inch cut to do on one end of the pad. So we're going to get that started here in just a few minutes. And then I'll give you some more information on how we're going to build the pad. Going to be a little bit different. I have a kind of a background in glass fiber reinforced concrete and countertops and artisan projects. And I'm going to bring some of that technology to this concrete slab. We're actually going to be working with sack material because we have a bunch of sacks left over from another job, as opposed to ready mix, which you might use for a job of this size. It's going to be about 2.5 cubic yards. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the technology that I'm going to put into that concrete to make it a very durable and long-lasting slab for this greenhouse. So with all that said, we're going to get started on some dirt work here, get this nice and level, and start building our concrete form. Well, this is clearly not a tutorial on how to use a skid steer, but I was able to get the location very close to level. It turned out to be a lot more dirt than I was expecting, but we're going to use this dirt for an outdoor garden next to the greenhouse. All right, well, as you can see behind me here, we've got the form all in place. I've got the stakes in place. Everything is pretty much ready to go. I cut the top of the stakes off so we're ready for screeding. And then I've got about 1.5 inches of gravel in the bottom of the form. That's going to give us a nice surface for the concrete to sit on. And then we've got 4 inches of space for the concrete itself. There's just one more thing I want to do before we're ready for concrete, and that's install a water connection. We're obviously going to be using water in the greenhouse. And instead of running a hose through the door or something like that, I'm actually going to put a connection through the slab. It's going to be very simple. It's going to be out of PVC. It's essentially just going to be a connection on the outside for a hose to hook up, or we may do a hard line at some point. It'll go down and then under the slab and back up into the greenhouse, and I'll have a connection for like a hose connection inside the greenhouse. That'll give us a nice clean way to get water inside without opening the door to let bugs or rodents or anything like that in. I'm also going to do the same for an electrical chase. We may use electricity at some point for fans or possibly a small heater, so I'm going to put a chase in for electrical in the same fashion. As you can see, I rented a drum mixer for this job, and we could not have mixed this many sacks without it. I was also fortunate to have a buddy come to help because cutting and dumping this many sacks is a lot of work. As I mentioned, I put some technology into this concrete. I had a few goals. First, give the concrete strength. To do this, I used fibers in the mix. You'll notice I didn't use any rebar or mesh in the form, and it's not needed when fibers are used for a slab like this. Another goal was to help the concrete cure. A lot of the problems that concrete suffers are due to improper curing. Typical sack concrete or ready mix should be wet cured for several days. This can be a challenge depending on where the concrete is located and what resources you have available to you. In addition, on very windy and dry days, like the day of this pour, the surface of the concrete can dry out before it has a chance to cure. This creates spalling and a weak top layer. To prevent these problems, I used a polymer addition to the mix water. The particular product I use for this pour is E5 Internal Cure by Specification Products. It eliminates the need for a wet cure, helps prevent the surface from drying out, and reduces shrinkage, which also reduces cracks. Another challenge with pouring concrete like this is workability. Concrete needs a very specific amount of water to fully hydrate. When this amount of water is added and the concrete is mixed, the resulting mixture is usually quite stiff and can be very challenging to get it worked into your form and screeded properly. If more water is added, the strength of the concrete quickly decreases. So to increase the slump and make the concrete more flowable, I added plasticizer. Plasticizers usually come in either liquid or powder form and can be either added to the mix water or to the concrete after it's been mixed with water and then all thoroughly mixed together. Plasticizers are effective for a limited time and do not reduce the strength of the concrete. All right, well, as you can see, we've got the concrete all finished. It's been several days since we did the pour. I've got the forms removed now, and it's time to start assembling the greenhouse itself. The kit comes from Planta on a pallet. I'm going to start unboxing that here in a few minutes. And of course, the kit includes instructions that aren't exactly straightforward. Fortunately, they do also have some videos online that really help show the process, so we're going to be kind of looking at both those items as we go. This isn't going to be a tutorial on how to assemble the greenhouse because Planta has that pretty much covered, but it is going to be interesting to watch the time lapse as this gets put together. So let's get started. The metal frame of the greenhouse went together reasonably well. The instructions were not the best, but once you get one section put together, the rest are pretty straightforward. The hardware supplied by Planta was of poor quality. We had a lot of trouble getting the nuts to thread onto the bolts. No big deal when it's a few, but when you're making up hundreds of these little bolts, it can get very frustrating. You will need at least one helper to stand up the pieces and secure them. This kind of work can go much quicker with more hands, and I was fortunate to have my wife helping me today. We were able to completely assemble the metal frame in one day. After the metal framework was finished and everything was torqued up, I secured the frame to the slab with concrete anchors. Building these windows and doors took quite a long time, but fortunately you can do this in the shop and then just bring them out for installation. Installation of the polycarbonate panels went pretty good. The exception was that one of the end ridge panels that came from Planta was too narrow. There was not enough material to properly seal against the roof panel in that place. This is just one of the issues I had with Planta and this kit while building this greenhouse, and I'll discuss these in more detail at the end of the video. There's a lot of prep required before installing the panels. All of the polycarbonate channels need to be sealed with tape. The roof panels need to be partially cut so that they bend over the peak, and the metal strips need to be taped onto the roof panels. I did all of this work in the shop because, again, there was a lot of wind during installation. After all that prep, the panels went into place quite easily. Here you can see installation of one of the automatic windows that we purchased. We have a total of 4 of these windows. The automatic windows are an option and are an added cost. The metal frame of the window is part of the kit, and you use the polycarbonate that you remove from the greenhouse to cover the window. The opening system uses a temperature-activated piston that starts to open around 65 degrees and is fully opened around 80 degrees. I really like this idea because heat in the greenhouse can be intense, and you can't always be around to open the windows. The windows work pretty well, but they have a fatal flaw, and I'll discuss this at the end of the video. All right, well, I'm out here at the greenhouse this morning. As you can see, it is finished. In fact, it's been in service for about 4 months now. It's currently September. And during that time, we have learned a ton about it, as well as been through some different weather conditions, including high winds, as well as snow. In fact, take a look at how the greenhouse looked after 12 inches of wet spring snow. So how has the greenhouse performed? Let's talk a little bit about how I feel about this particular kit. Unfortunately, I've had a few issues. The first was just 2 days after we finished construction. We had some pretty heavy wind. It was 40-mile-an-hour gusts, and unfortunately, the 2 automatic windows on the west side of the greenhouse were damaged. The opening arms, the opening device itself, as well as the cross members that the opening arms are attached to, were all bent or damaged. I was astonished and very disappointed because I know that more wind is to come at this location. So I showed the damage to Planta, and they told me that the windows are not rated for the 65 miles an hour of wind that the rest of the greenhouse is rated for. How they can sell an automatic window that's not rated for the same amount of wind as the rest of the greenhouse is beyond me. Furthermore, Planta has refused to warranty the windows. They will not replace the parts that were damaged, and they won't even return my emails at this point. So very disappointed with how that all has worked out. Another issue, and I mentioned this earlier in the video, is the polycarbonate panels on the ends of the greenhouse. At the top of each end is a triangle-shaped piece, and one of mine was too narrow to properly seat up against the roof panels. So there's not a good seal there, and I'm worried that the rubber seal, the rubber gasket there, may come out at some point because it's not pressed into place. I was disappointed with that, so I mentioned it to Planta, and they said they'll mention it to their manufacturing. But for my particular greenhouse, I'm out of luck. Another issue I've had is the way the polycarbonate panels come down to the base. I poured this concrete base to very specific dimensions so that the polycarbonate panels would overlap the base a little bit, create a nice seal there, keep bugs out as well as cold air. Now that the greenhouse is finished, there's a gap there. No overlapping as Planta said there would be. So really not quite sure how I'm going to deal with that in the future when really cold weather comes. So all that said, would I buy another Planta greenhouse? It's hard to say. I've had some issues, as I've described. Nothing that is horrible, but Planta has refused to address them. I'm concerned that if there was a problem with the main structure of the greenhouse, that they wouldn't honor the 10-year warranty that they advertise. So overall, it has been a negative experience with Planta.
Let's talk about how long it took to build the greenhouse. For my particular location, I had to use heavy equipment to excavate and level the area. I then poured a concrete pad. I figured these items took about 14 hours to accomplish. There are a lot of different types of bases you could use, so your particular project could vary quite a bit. Next, I started assembling the greenhouse kit. Once I figured out the instructions, the metal frame took about 8 hours to build. The windows and doors that are installed on each end of the greenhouse took about 4 hours to put together. Prepping the polycarbonate and installing it took 7 hours. Building and installing the 4 automatic windows took 6 hours. Installing the ridge plate and the metal bands that tie everything together took 2 hours. And finally, I spent about 4 hours dressing the dirt work around the greenhouse and spreading gravel to match the surrounding landscaping. Altogether, I figure about 45 hours for the project. Extra help can obviously speed things up, and some of these steps require at least 2 people. And then how about the cost? For me, the Sungrow 20 kit from Planta cost $3,600, but I've seen that price vary. The 4 automatic windows were $380. Shipping of the whole kit was $270. The shipping will obviously vary based on your location. The kit comes packaged on a pallet. You'll have to pay extra if you don't have a forklift and need a delivery truck that has a lift gate. I elected to retrieve the kit from the trucking company's dock with my flatbed trailer, and this saved a few bucks. When it comes to the base, there will be a lot of variation in cost. Even a concrete slab will vary based on how you decide to do the pour, what additives you want to invest in, and how much labor you might need. A base could be very inexpensive if you decide to use a gravel floor and stake the greenhouse into the ground. The plumbing and electrical was around $300. In that, I'm including a lot of the parts and pieces I used to actually get the through-floor connections up and running. And finally, I threw $200 in for miscellaneous, which includes the cost of gravel, some trellising items inside the greenhouse, a thermometer, etc. Altogether, it comes out to around $5,500. If you need additional labor, that can really add up. I'll also note that these costs were in the spring of 2022, so you might want to consider inflation. I'll conclude the video with a few shots of the greenhouse in action. Thanks for watching, and feel free to ask questions or comment below.